My name is Mark Bayer. I'm with Antique Motorcycle Foundation, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Now, to really tell you about who we are, we have this brochure here, which tells what we do, and just something that's really a big deal to me, but it's probably not to a lot of people, is I've done a study on motorcycle charities in America, and there's thousands of them, but most of the money goes to someone with a heart attacks or medical conditions or some other things. Janie's Ride in Kansas City raises $1 million a year. But AMF, we support the motorcycle industry. We do the seminars, scholarships. We have the largest database of vintage motorcycle information. So all of our money goes to the community. In other words, all of our money goes to the motorcycle community for the history, to protect to protect the history of the motorcycle. Thank you very much for coming. And Ted, did you want to say a word? Mr. Motorcyclepedia himself. We're honored to have you here, sir.
Thank you guys.
Could you tell me and I tell them, or do you want to have the mic?
I'll tell them a little bit. So anyway, if we go back with this foundation, 2008 it was founded. There was about 8 charter members. And my dad and I were on it originally. And then as time went on, I think Mr. Wing, and then we had newer guys from throughout the country. I guess a lot of things were, the money or the funding that started it came from the AMC. And then there was always talk about the foundation, how, they took money or whatever, but it's its own. The reason being is that whatever the AMC is, it's not a foundation or any kind of charity. So they took the money and split it off for the foundation so that could sustain, and now it's invested, and I believe Roger has explained how it's growing, and it's throwing off enough money to do the programs and whatever else through the education. I know now you're doing, looking at estate planning and whatever. So there's a lot to it. The only thing I just said to Roger, and he didn't really answer, I said we should have a membership part of it. When you come to this meet and you're around with the motorcycle guys, that's a whole different psyche than what we may be standing here today. You're more involved with the history, education, and whatever, how it's going to go on and continue. And you're not riding around making noise, with some bike. So there's another part to motorcycling besides the riding and whatever, hell raising, because that's how it starts out. But anyway, that's what I want Roger and these guys to do. Please go ahead and let's see if we can actually work some kind of membership. But thank you. Keep going. There's all new faces. There you go. Thanks.
Listen, you have an outline of what they're going to talk about. There's some pages in the back to make notes, if you want to make notes, with a AMF pin to boot. So I'm not going to introduce the people. They can introduce themselves, so we don't have to go through it twice. So Mr. Clay Baker, he's CEO of Moto Nexus, so the floor is yours.
So you started a motorcycle foundation at the height of the economic crisis. I work with very optimistic people in my day job. That one takes the cake. I was driving from Detroit down I-75 to get here yesterday, and it dawned on me how stupid I am. You guys all came here to have a lot of fun and go see this show, and somebody drug you in here to talk about death and taxes. And so I'm going to chat a little bit about why we're all here, why this is important, why you should pay attention to anything that I have to say, and I'll put some disclaimers on that. Can everybody hear me okay, though? Let me just ask that in the back. All right. So the majority of what I'm going to do here is hopefully just to educate and entertain, and then we'll move on from there. So one of the reasons that I'm here is I do have a special skill. And I love to share this particularly with groups. And my skill is I know what each of you is thinking, and it's this confusing conversation in my head right now. So I have to separate you guys into groups. So we're going to separate the men in one group, and I'm going to tell you all what you're thinking right now. That was naughty. you're thinking, I need to be out there. There's something I want to grab before it gets picked up. And there's so many other things I'd rather be doing than being in this room right now. And when I separate the women aside, it's not as confusing. There's a very direct theme. They all pretty much say the same thing because we all know they went to school to learn how to do this, right? And so when I think about yes, it is my real hair, and I'm 64. The theme amongst the women is, I love him, I love the collection. What am I going to do with all this stuff one day? And that's a conversation that my wife and I have had to have on numerous occasions, and we've sorted it out. And it's led to me wanting to be more proactive about talking about this subject with other people. So the last statement that I made identifies two very important pieces of information for all of you. She is, by actuarial tables, going to outlive you. Sorry. And she is not as knowledgeable about every tool, every bike, every car, the parts on the shelves, the boxes that are labeled MISC bike stuff. And passing on that knowledge through some form of formal documentation is really, really important. It preserves your own legacy. It locks in some value instead of allowing it to be lost at some auction house somewhere. So let me explain a little further, because this gets back to my day job. I worked in Silicon Valley tech for a number of years before I started an investment fund with a partner. And one of the things I've learned working in Silicon Valley was you have all these startups. It's exceptionally entrepreneurial. I don't know how to describe it. Unless you live there for a while, it's hard to imagine. 90% of financial decisions in households are made by women. I thought that was an interesting statistic, and it's a really recent survey. And so, given my job as a securities analyst, I decided, well, I want to tear that report apart, and I want to see how much of it's truth, how much of it's BS. I want to know the granular. And when I tore it apart, what I found was women are making almost 100% of the day-to-day financial decisions within a household. The men are making decisions about estate planning. All right, let's tear that down a little further. 50 to 60% of estates go into probate. 5 to 10% of your estate goes to the state probate court when that happens. The conclusion that I have is, guys, we're making lousy decisions about our estate planning. So there's some things that you can do. This doesn't have to be a lecture, but unfortunately that's going to be the nature of parts of this. And so when I looked a little deeper into this data, I started asking around to private equity guys, people who do what I do, the venture capital firms. There are venture capital firms all across the country that will only invest in female started businesses and businesses that are run where the CEO is a woman. The reason for that is the return on the shareholder return is significantly higher than those run by men. So we asked this question about estate planning and women in finances. You start bringing some correlations together, and you find out that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. When I asked John Doerr, the head of a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, this a few years back, he said, yeah, this has been going on. We've known this for a long time. The surveys keep showing us the same thing year after year after year. And he said it's very simple. Women like to grow things. Think about the motherly instinct, all right? Men like to conquer things. And so it's very short-term decisions of do this now, where you get longer-term decisions out of women. So women, congratulations. Guys, I'm sorry, we need to do better. All right. So why listen to me? My job is I run a hedge fund. I'm sorry, that's not a bad word. Not all hedge fund managers are evil billionaires. I can only speak for myself, not for the rest of the industry. And in that job, I analyze businesses, try to figure out the macroeconomics of what industries should be successful over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and then make investments in those companies. So through that, I'm valuing a company's stock by pulling its revenue and earnings forward to today, looking for those hidden gems that we can buy today that'll grow over time very quickly for our investors. My passion is vintage motorcycles. I have a collection. There's 18 bikes right now. When my brother asked me why I have 18 bikes, I said because I sold 2 last week. So they come and go all the time. Right now there's 18 in there and I love them. But this notion of learning how to place a value on these assets, that at any given time, my collection was worth significantly more in 2019 than it is today. And there's a reason for that, and it's because the stock market is directly correlated to the vintage bike market and car market. There is a level of vehicle where the price doesn't matter to anybody and neither does the market. Those guys, you know, did you watch the Cyclone sell for $1.2 million at Mecum in January? Anybody see that? Okay. Plus a 10% buyer's fee and a 10% seller's fee. There was a lot of money changing hands. I sat between those two guys who were bidding, and I can tell you nothing mattered to them. Not the price, not the stock market. They had the cash to go and buy a museum piece that they wanted, and there was no drinking involved. So it's important to understand that in my job and in my passion as a collector and writer, restorer, that there's an interconnection between what I do and what I do for my clients. My clients frequently ask me for estate planning information, particularly around things like motorcycle and car collections, but all kinds of other stuff. You know, should I buy or lease this car, things like that. I am not a lawyer. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an estate planner. But I have to deal with these issues on a regular basis anyway, and then turn my clients back to their team, whoever that is. If you have a family lawyer or, you know, CPA or somebody who does your taxes, that's your team. So let's talk a little bit about passing knowledge on to whether it's your spouse. And I do acknowledge that sometimes the women are the collectors and not the husbands. I run across that from time to time. So when I say collector, it's whoever is relevant in your household. But I touched on this a minute ago about correlation between bikes and the market. So if we talk about correlation versus causation for a minute, this has a lot to do with why you want to pass on this knowledge, all right? And maybe the conversations you have in your own head about, well, it doesn't really matter, I'll be gone, right? Whatever happens, happens, right? Well, there was an early cancer research study done that looked at coffee drinkers and rates of cancer. This is a long time ago, right? It doesn't matter anymore. And what they found was that there was a very high correlation between coffee drinkers and cancer. So they took the study. That's the first round, uncontrolled study, right? So realize that a lot of what you hear in the news is a first round uncontrolled study. So you got to ignore that. So the researchers break that down into groups, and 2 of the groups were coffee drinkers who don't smoke and coffee drinkers who smoke. You can guess what the relationship was, right? So it turns out that if you smoke, you also tend to drink a lot of coffee. The people who only drank coffee but didn't smoke had substantially lower rates of cancer than the overall population at large. So now you've got this relationship and this data that says, okay, we'll just keep parsing that out. Well, if we look at what we're doing in our hobby and our jobs and passions, whatever, how about, and you can shout out answers if you like. How about drinking and high prices at the Mecum auction in Las Vegas? Is that a causation or a correlation? Turns out neither. It turns out these are very serious buyers. I'm usually amongst them, buyers and sellers, and the amount of drinking that's going on amongst people with bidding cards is pretty low. Every once in a while you wonder if there wasn't a kilo of cocaine in a gas tank. We saw that bike pass last January. You can't make sense of the number, but most of the times you can. There's how about low prices and no paperwork on your vehicle? Causation or correlation? It's both. It's both. Here's one you're not going to like. An extended period of stress over the passing of a loved one. Yeah, there's a correlation, the stress of the passing of a loved one. The causation for the extended period of stress, no paperwork, no documentation, no instructions of any kind. What is this, right? How about preserving your legacy? So on those last few issues, we all need to think about what memories we want to leave behind, and that's the part that you can control. We can't control what day is the final lap, but you can control all of that stuff, right? What your wishes are, et cetera. So in preserving your legacy, what I think about is that your collection tells a story. I know mine does. The first bike I bought to restore was a CB 754, a 1972 model. I built it specifically to go to the Coil Motorcycle Gathering in Carmel Valley. It won. And then it went to a bunch of other shows. It's got a room full of trophies. Now I ride it. It's done with that life. I had one in college and rode it from Bozeman, Montana through Yellowstone Park relentlessly whenever the weather was good with a fly rod and a sleeping bag. That was my routine. It took me 7 years to get through college. So my other bike then was a 1969 Taco mini bike, Taco 22 with a 3-horsepower Briggs & Stratton. I wanted one in the worst way when I was a child in 1969. And I finally have it in my collection. So this is where a lot of this starts. They're very emotional purchases. There's stories there that I've told it ad nauseum, but now they're recorded where everybody can get at it. It can be printed out and shared. So it'll be part of the family story, part of the family genealogy. So preserving your legacy, I think, is a big issue. You spent years collecting, researching, restoring, and there's a history for each one of those pieces that I think is valuable, and it should go along with the bike. Every year at Mecum, Jan, you're there, and a bunch of other guys I know are serious collectors, we see the widow collections. And I'm sorry for that term, but it's what is passed around. This is some of the saddest stuff in the motorcycle world, because we just had a really big collection last January get sold off. And his cars were there, and his bikes, and all the road art. 40 years of collecting from him. Yeah. And that Cyclone was part of that collection. And a lot of beautiful, beautiful stuff. But the family had no means of taking care of it, storing it. It was expensive to keep up. And so a lot of it went across the block at reserve. Some of it went at no reserve. But the whole point was get it all sold today. So when those bikes go across the block in these collections, and we see more and more of them, there's fewer and fewer individual sellers and more collections. And they get 2 minutes or less, often at no reserve, so that the seller doesn't have to bring anything home. The seller paid a listing fee. It's not cheap. They had to be there for the auction. That's staying in a hotel at the South Point, food, of course you're going to drink and gamble. And then there's a 10% fee to the buyer and to the seller, right? So you paid to list it and you paid to sell it as well. So thinking about how you want to make these sales and having that as part of your estate plan that says, yeah, I want these to go to Mecum or Barrett-Jackson or wherever. I want these to go to this auction site online where you won't have the big fees. This is important. Put it in your estate plan. So this is a big one. You want to document all this stuff to avoid family feuds. Nothing creates sibling rivalry faster than who gets the 67 Shelby GT500. Right? You want to see your family get torn apart over something like that? I had to deal with my mom's estate. My father passed away in 2007. My mom passed away a few years later. And my job was to keep her investments working so that she didn't outlive her money and she was very healthy. And then when she finally did pass, I had to deal with my siblings who know nothing. They barely balance their checkbook. Okay, I'm sorry. We'll edit that one out later. And it was traumatic, I got to say, at the very least. And I'm married into a family of lawyers. In fact, my father-in-law is a retired judge who had to deal with a lot of this estate planning stuff. And he said, Clay, hire somebody. Just walk away from it. Hire somebody to deal with it so you don't have to do it. And I didn't listen. And I think he actually gave me some really good advice. I'll be gone. It doesn't matter. I have heard this ad nauseum from guys who they just don't want to deal with the estate plan. You buy life insurance so your spouse won't worry about the bills. You write a will, a wish list, of what you want your final wishes to be, and hopefully you have a family trust that dictates how things will actually happen. But then you leave behind, we leave behind a collection of all this stuff that has to be sorted out, all the parts, all the tools, the specialty stuff that needs to go with the British bikes, and, you know, what's a Whitworth tool? And, you know, that kind of stuff. And trying to sort out what's what and what goes with what is a major undertaking, whether you have 2 bikes or 200. The problem's the same, right? It's just different scale. So it does matter to the people that you're leaving behind that there's a really good plan in place. So if you leave behind a poorly documented collection, you might as well have just written the information on the back of an oil change receipt and said, well, that's good enough, right? Because it's about the same. So you want to document everything so that you don't have 12 boxes that all have, with a marker on them, MISC bike stuff. I have a friend with 3 storage units that look like that. So, and the wife knows about 2 of the storage units. So, if your heirs or museums can't accept your collection because they don't have the space, they don't have the knowledge, know-how, or something, be prepared to have the information in place somewhere that who's left behind is going to be able to send that info very quickly and easily over to an auction house and have them have some knowledge of the value of these bikes and cars, whatever it is you collect. For me, my preference is to give my heirs bragging rights. When they sell off my collection one day, and I hope this is my great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, I hope that their bragging rights are, look how smart he was to collect all these motorcycles and cars. It's important. If you've ever doom scrolled through Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, I do this before I fall asleep at night. I tell my wife I'm reading, right? This is really important stuff. And how many of those bikes do you see that say, well, ran when parked, it just needs the carb cleaned, and I don't have any document, no title, but I'll write you a bill of sale. In most states, that's illegal to transfer title unless it's just a parts vehicle, right? In California, it's highly illegal, but it happens all the time anyway. We see that on there. I've tracked those bikes. This is what a nuisance I am with data. I started going through, and I spent over a year doing this, tracking all the vehicles, motorcycles specifically, that had no paperwork and what the asking price was. And as time went on, you're like, oh, they slashed the price. Okay, now it's down to $2,000. Oh, now it's down to $1,500, right? Finally, it says $500 or best offer, right? What I found was, on average, those vehicles with no documentation get a haircut of 50% of their actual value. So that's what you're doing when you don't document. You're saying, oh, this isn't very important. I don't need to write all this down. You just slashed 50% of the value of that vehicle off. Maybe it's a Vincent, and somebody left behind gets 5 or 10, sells it for 5 or 10 grand, right? Who knows? Maybe it's something like this in the collection. You're like, yeah, everybody that got left behind knows that it's valuable, but how much? So they're at the mercy of the auction house or doing their own research, right? So let's don't do that. There's a lot of value in that documentation. So how do you do it? To document a collection, you need photographs, descriptions, maintenance records if you have them. If there's some provenance on the bike. The last owner or the 3 owners back was Steve McQueen. We know there's a premium price paid for a Steve McQueen bike. The family has been living off of selling 2 bikes a year for a long time now, right? And now that Chad's gone, they're still rolling them out, and the rest of the family is living off of that. So what's the provenance? That could be important, even if it's just your story. I had one of these when I was a kid. This is why it was important to me, all of that. Lock that information down. So for photographs, the problem with doing photographs now, if the bike won't be sold for 10 or 20 years, is it's not going to be the same bike, right? So the photographs need to be fresh and relevant. The best photographs that I see are on Bring a Trailer. They have a whole network nationwide of photographers. Bringatrailer.com, if you're not familiar with it, it's the largest online auction site. They did $1.5 billion in gross sales last year of cars and bikes, boats, RVs, all kinds of stuff. If you look at a motorcycle on Bring a Trailer, it will typically have 100 or more photographs detailing the whole bike. I think it's $300, something like that, for one of their photographers to come to your place and take all the pictures and do it right. So if you were going to go to auction, you want to have those kind of photographs. So what I've told some friends of mine to do who are getting ready to go to auction, I said, well, just print out all those thumbnail photos and use that as your guide. Take the pictures, check them off, right? You can do it with your phone, right? Get some really good photos. So I just sold a bike on Bring a Trailer. I did exactly that to prove it to myself. And I got a nice number from a guy in St. Louis, Missouri. And they're going to ship the bike out from San Jose, California, from my house next week. So very smooth process. It was wonderful. So, but there are essentially 3 effective ways that you can document what you have. You can go to the stationery store, the Office Supply, and for 99 cents get a composition book, and just on each page, 1972 Honda 754, or Harley Davidson Sportster, or whatever it is, year, make, model, color, condition. This is really important. I'll come back to that. In fact, I think, Jan, you might be able to talk a bit about condition from your side of this. Every financial transaction for that bike put on a line, just like it's a check register, right? You sold the old exhaust pipes and bought a new set. Okay, there was income and an expense, right? The point of doing that is at the bottom of that financial register, you have a cost basis now of sales and purchases of parts and service, things like that. And that cost basis tells you, all right, well, I have $3,800 into this bike. All right, that's my bottom line for selling this. Maybe it's not, but that's close, right? So you can do it as simply as that at almost no cost. The other, and maybe tape a picture of the bike on the page so it's easy to reference out there, but that number on the bike, you hang a tag or put a sticker or something on the bike so it's easy to go out and find number 15 out of your collection, right? You could use a spreadsheet that's free, like from Google Sheets. You can go there if you have a Gmail account or something. This is all free. And you could do the same thing if you're comfortable using a spreadsheet. The third way to do it is, you're the first people to hear about this other than Mark and Jan. MotoNexus, we launched a new app. It's available right now. It's called MotoNexus Garage. You can go to motonexusgarage.com and see what it's about. It's free to just roam around and see what it looks like. You can get a 7-day free trial. It's very cheap to use. It does exactly what we're talking about. You document every bike, every vehicle, trucks, RVs, boats, whatever it is that you've got, parts, road art. Document all the details, the VIN numbers, the motor numbers, all of this stuff, and it automatically generates an identification number that if you sell and delete that out of the software, it retires the number so it doesn't get used again and confused. I was trying to imagine my wife going into my storage unit where I keep most of my bikes. It's hard to walk through there, and I'm imagining her looking on the headstocks of these old bikes in the dark or with a flashlight, trying to find the VIN number, and then crawling under to find motor numbers and matching that up with titles that are at home in a file. And I was like, no, this isn't happening. And so that was when we started working on creating this app, because I realized that there were a lot more people with the same problem. Most collections are 5 bikes or less. I'm imagining many people in this room probably fall into that category. I don't know. I know somebody who sold 110 bikes in January, and that was a little tiny bit of his collection.
Less than 10%.
He's got a long way to go, and he keeps buying. So there's, and everything about that collection is in his head. So that's a really tough one. So there's 3 ways that you can go about doing it. It makes it easy. I was sitting in my office, actually while I was thinking about this presentation, and I was coding this app. And my wife walks in, and she's actually the talker in the family. She's got a lot to say about everything. Brilliant woman. And she said, have you got a minute to talk? And I'm looking up, and I'm thinking there's 70,000 words in her head that needs to come out right now. And I really don't have time for this, but I'll say, okay, but let me ask you a question first. Do you know where all the titles are to my bikes? Because, well, I think they're in the safe. Yeah, okay. Do you know which titles go with which bikes? 'Cause, oh, I'm not worried about that. Because when you're gone, my much younger and handsomer boyfriend is going to take care of all of that. We had a family trust the following week. And I'll just quickly say before we get into that, wills are for wishes, trusts are directives. And trusts are pretty cheap to set up, and I'll talk about that a little bit. A will is you're hoping that the person who now has responsibility for dealing with your estate is going to follow it. Unfortunately, if you just have a will, the state, in most every state, will step in and require you to go through probate. As I said before, you're going to lose 5 to 10% in fees in probate. If you have a house and all of this other property in this collection, let's say it's worth $1 million, you're willing to give $100,000 of it in fees to the state? I don't want the government in my business. So with an inexpensive trust, you lock all this up and you don't have to tell anybody about it. In fact, South Dakota is the Switzerland of America, of the United States. That's why the banking industry is there. You can create a trust here in this state and re-domicile it in South Dakota for a small fee and have an attorney up there deal with it. This is how wealthy people hide assets, especially from their spouse. So I'm not advocating that anybody do this, but there are all kinds of different ways to set up trust. They can be very simple. They can be very complex. When I was single, I had a trust set up because I had investment accounts and partnerships in some businesses and things like that. My sister's an actress, so I invested in one of her films, small amount of money. But that made me part of a partnership that gets a K-1 every year form that tells me what my proceeds are, how much I've lost. And I think I've lost all I want to lose on that film. But it was $750 for me to have that trust written up for me. And it kept the state out of anything if anything ever happened to me. When I got married the second time and we set up this new trust, I think it cost us around $4,000. Less than the price of one of my Hondas from the 60s and 70s, right? A very complex trust that I had with my first wife was, I don't know, twice that. It's not a lot of money. If we think $4,000 to $10,000-ish as a range for setting up a trust, it's just not a lot of money to keep everybody out of your business, right? And to make sure that the trustee, who is you while you're alive, right? You're not relinquishing control of your assets. The trustee that takes over, maybe it's your spouse right away, and then it becomes children. It can be designed to go on for generations. In South Dakota and Wyoming, your trust can run on for 999 years. These are called dynastic trusts, right? So if you have something you really want to protect for a long time, either create a foundation and put all the bikes and cars in a museum, or you set up a dynastic trust that lives on and on forever. So probably longer than we need it to. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of bullet points here of important stuff that you might want to think about, and you can take notes later after. I'm going to stick around after this. But secure storage, put the titles in a secure place. I keep them in the DMV envelopes, and I have a label on the outside that says what it is, so she doesn't have to open it up and try to decipher the title, right, to figure out which one goes with which. It's right there on the outside of the envelope, and they're stuck into our home safe. Put them in a safety deposit box, any fireproof location. Make digital copies, scan them, take a picture with your phone. There's PDF apps for free that you can put on your phone and get a nice square instead of a wavy image, of a document. Store those away in a safe place, like cloud storage, Dropbox, Google, wherever, a thumb drive, and stick it in the safety deposit box, someplace where it won't go up in a house fire or something. Coordinating all of this stuff, as I was talking about, what I did to coordinate bikes with titles with my wife, there's a tag with a number that relates to where I put all my collection into the MotoNexus garage. So all you got to do is walk in and look for number 12, and there it is. You've got all the information. She knows exactly what it is, and then all the photos for that bike are stored away on a thumb drive. It seems like a lot of detail. And you can laugh about it now as, yeah, right, I'm going to get around to that. But you can laugh now or they'll cuss you out later. I mean, it's, it's up to you. Making digital copies of everything, title transfers. This is a common one. I'm going to defer to Jan here in just a bit to talk more about the titles. But if you have a trust, it's a common practice not to put your vehicles in a trust. And the reason for that is in a trust you have what's called is anybody here set up a trust already? Is there anybody in the room that knows what I'm talking about? Okay, a few of you, great. So there's a certificate of trust, right, that says who it is, what it's managed by, who the trustees are, all of that kind of stuff. And it's a document that every bank wants to change the name into the family trust name. And so if you have a vehicle title and you change it into the name of the trust, when it sells or it goes to auction, you've got to have that certificate of trust to go along with it. So your trustee or your spouse or whoever has got to deal with this just has an additional complication. I bought a bike right at the beginning of COVID from a guy in Southern California, CL450 Flying Dragon. It is original. And he needed some cash fast, and so I bought this bike, fully restored, 100-point show bike. It's gorgeous. I get home, and I live in Northern California, and I realize that the title is in the name of his family trust. So he needs to go find his trust. He didn't know where it was. His wife was out of town. She gets back, says, oh, it's in the safety deposit box at our family bank, not at your business bank. Okay, so we go find that. They get it out. They make copies. Mail a copy up to me so I have the hard copy that they've signed and everything. Now I can go to the DMV again and get the title transfer completed. This is what I'm talking about. It just adds complication, and the more vehicles you have and the more you put into the trust, the more complicated it becomes for everybody. So there are easier ways to deal with this, and this gets down to the and/or dilemma, right? And there's some other choices you can make as well. If you have a title that's in the name of you and your wife, John Jones and Mary Jones, you both have to sign the title to transfer it because you said and, you're both owners. If it says John Jones or Mary Jones, only one of you needs to sign. Either one has the ability to sign it. There are I think half of states have a transfer on death law. I have a cousin up in Montana who's got more vehicles than I can count, and he's done them all transfer on death to his wife. Now, there is no way on earth that those two will ever get divorced. But imagine you get divorced, you die, and there's a transfer on death to your former spouse who may not even want it or even have a place for it. Right? So that's a complication. You can avoid that quite easily by just saying, all right, let's just go home and sign the titles, because one day these titles are going to come out of the safety deposit box or the safe, and they're going to go to somebody, whether it's a gift or you're selling or going to auction, they're going to somebody. Just sign it. Be done with it. Don't have that complication waiting for someday, right? And there's a further complication in this. My wife actually reminded me of this, was, yeah, you put all that stuff in the computer, but there's paper titles, there's keys, there's vintage literature you've collected, all the stuff that goes with each one of these, right? Where's that? So we have a knockbox. Anybody else here have a knockbox? You know what that is? Next of kin box. Okay? It's not a big file cabinet. It's a little portable plastic file box with a bunch of file folders in it. You can buy one online for about $100, already set up with all the labels and everything. And in each one of those folders, you put, the very first folder is instructions, how to use this thing, where to go, what to do next. I'm gone. I can't speak for myself anymore. Here it is. These are the instructions. So in addition to whether you have a will or a trust, a knockbox is a really handy way to have everything collected in one place, put away in a safe place, and so that people know where to go find stuff, right? It's just trying to simplify things for the people on the other end. I'm not going to go deep into valuing because that's really something to be done at the time that you're going to sell or go to auction. But auction prices are the best way to know what real market value is. So when people come to Moto Nexus, they're saying, well, I don't know what reserve price to put on a bike, and we require a reserve. We ask people not to sell at no reserve because we don't have the kind of audience that the bigger auctions have. So the point of a reserve is to figure out what is the lowest number you're comfortable taking. So you've got a motorcycle, you want to sell it on Facebook Marketplace for $10,000, and you're thinking in the back of your head, somebody offers me $8,000 cash, I'll take it. That's your reserve right there. You just figured it out. What is that price I would take if somebody made me that offer, right? We've had a sweet hot rod on our auction site for a while. They're hard to sell. It's a niche market, and each vehicle is so unique. And I know he has a lot more into it. And the other day, the owner said, "Clay, if somebody offered me $30,000 for that truck, I'd take it." And I'm looking at my driveway trying to find space. It's a really, really sweet truck. But but that's how you set a reserve. It's not, well, here's the price I want. Well, you might get it, but you might not. It just depends on what the emotional decision at that particular auction, that week or that day. Remember, it's 2 minutes on a random day in January, right? Hopefully, and I'm talking about the Mecum auction or any other online auction, it's a random 7 days during the year. What's the magic in that? There isn't any, right? So a Moto Nexus, if it doesn't sell, we'll run it again if you want us to. We'll run it ad nauseum. It doesn't matter to us. You want to think about this stuff in terms of how you're organizing and how you figure out what is the value of this vehicle. And it comes down to condition. They're poor vehicles. Doesn't matter if it's a motorcycle or car. The condition is poor. That means it's a parts vehicle. There's fair, there's good, there's excellent, and there's concourse. Concourse is the best in the world. It shows up on the lawns, at Pebble Beach and at the Quail and Amelia Island and these places, right? These are the best vehicles out there. They're flawless, right? Most of us believe that we have an excellent vehicle. I have never had somebody submit a vehicle to Moto Nexus that wasn't excellent. And trying to talk somebody down from that can only be done with photographs or sending them to links of the same bike on different auction sites. Say, all right, here's one that's excellent. Here's one that was valued as good. Sometimes they get valued in between. And so knowing what that condition is tells you a lot about how you're going to put a price on your particular bike. You have to be really, really honest with yourself because the marketplace is going to be exceptionally honest with you about what they're going to pay. All right, and then you got to take into fact the conditions. So since November of 22, this whole market has been in a slide. We pretty much bottomed out. It's starting to pick up a little bit. And I'm specifically talking about collector vehicles. At the very high end, that doesn't matter. That's not affected. But as people find that they have less mad money, some extra cash to go out and buy these toys. I just want to have a new Harley. I just want that Indian, or I've always wanted, a CB92 Honda, and I just bought one, so that came front of brains. When we get nervous about what's coming, what's ahead of us, what's our sentiment? The Michigan Sentiment Survey tells us regularly what the sentiment of the consumer is and of CEOs and CFOs in industry. So while all of that seems to be unrelated, it is directly related to what people pay for bikes. So we're in a low market where people are holding on to their cash. We have record amounts of cash being held in bank accounts, savings, checking, money market accounts, people buying CDs, things like that. And that's cash. That's unproductive money, earning 3-4% maybe, right? Or worse, they're putting them into bonds. We actually have a provision in the fund that I run that says no bonds and no foreign equities. So, we only do U.S. stuff. So there is a direct correlation between cash that's available to spend on your bike and what's going on in the marketplace. So if you're not paying attention to what the S&P is doing, and where the general market is and what the sentiment is, you're going to have a really hard time figuring out why is the market so low. You know, why won't it climb out of this slump? I remember back in 2019, people were getting, well, shoot, I was at the 2020 COVID Mecum auction in Vegas. They had to move it over to the convention center, and we're sitting at tables like this, 3 people to a table to social distance and all this stuff. And I saw a restored Honda, 1980 Honda C70 Passport, the little scooter with the white skirt, you know, in yellow, $6,000. Not to a collector, to a 20-something who's going to put it on the back of his little SUV and go social distance out in a national park or somewhere, right? That crowd has discovered our bikes. The 20 and 30 and 40-somethings are buying our bikes. Our show in California this year has a brand new class. We closed out the antique class because the guys who are 80 plus who have these don't want to haul them out to our show anymore. But there's guys in their 30s and 40s who say, well, I've got a bike that's in the 80s or in the 90s and I want to show it. Well, there's a show called the Radwood, and it honors the period from 1980 to 1999, and all the entrants show up in period correct clothing. So guys are dressed like Don Johnson, and the women are showing up in jazzercise clothes, and you know, and it's a big fun event, right? It's a festival. And so we added a rad class because a guy who's 32 in Scotts Valley, California came and said, would you do this for us? And he's talking about, you know, his people, his age, right? I was like, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? Nobody ever shows up to claim the trophy for antiques, so yeah, we'll create a rad class trophy. So there is a new generation buying bikes. Registrations for motorcycles in the United States are at an all-time high, while sales are slumping terribly, particularly for American-made bikes. And it doesn't matter why all that's happening, but realize registrations are at an all-time high, but they're not making as many bikes as are being registered, and this number keeps going up. They're buying vintage bikes. They're buying them at auction. They're buying them on Bring a Trailer. They've got lots of cash. I am astounded at what my 30-year-old daughters make. They've got cash to go do all kinds of wonderful things, right? So realize that the motorcycle industry, this motorcycle thing is not dying. We are. And I'm the young one in the crowd. I mean, I turn 64 next month, and you know, at all the shows and stuff I go to, they're like, well, you're just a kid. You got another 20, 30 years of doing this. I'm like, yeah, okay. When I'm 94, I'm going to be collecting bikes. Yeah, I think we're moving them on from there. But so anyway, give this a lot of thought about how you're going to value your bikes. And then they have to be insured, and this is a question that is online all the time, and all the motorcycles, hey, where do you guys get your insurance? Well, if it's a bike you ride, it's probably Geico or Progressive or something like that, right? If it's a vintage bike and it's got collector value, you go to Haggerty. And the reason is not because they're the cheapest or the best coverage or something, it's because you know what the value of that bike is, and you can put a price on it. So that CB754 that won at the Quail for me has $30,000 of restoration into it, of all NOS parts. The frame and the motor is the only thing original to that bike. Every washer and nut, bolt, paint job, everything is original from Honda. So with that kind of investment, I can't just go to Geico because they're going to give me a insurance policy for a 1972 Honda. Right, which is nothing. It wouldn't cover what I paid for the bike on eBay. So I go to Haggerty and I put my valuation on it, and they sell me a policy based on how much I say it's worth. And if it goes down in value, I change that. If it goes up, I change it. Right, and so it's very easy to keep up with. You can do it all online. So. I'm not going to go through all of those notes, but I want to touch on one thing. This astounds me in tax policy. You can gift $19,000 to an individual every year, per person, every year, without having to report it to the IRS or claim it on your taxes or theirs. It's a gift. If I go to a restaurant and I want to leave a $19,000 tip for the waiter or waitress, they have to claim it on their taxes. I don't understand that. With all the work I do in financial markets, I can't separate that out and figure out why was that gift taxed and this gift wasn't. So why this is important in your estate planning is you can gift your bikes and cars and other collectibles, whatever it is that you want to give on to your heirs. If you know that I want my cousin Bob to have my Triumph Bonneville, okay, in your trust or will, right? Cousin Bob, we've discussed this, and you get to have the Triumph Bonneville if you promise not to paint the tank lime green again, right? So, you put clear instructions down, but you can show it as a gift. You can claim that it was worth $5,000 or $20,000, whatever, right? Just realize anything over $19,000 in a gift, someone's going to start paying taxes on that, right? So for a married couple, the number's $38,000. So it's a wonderful way to pass cash, vehicles, other property onto your children, your other heirs, whoever it is you want to give it to, without having any tax implications. It's already at that point, because you've signed the title over to your cousin or your children or whatever, it's already out of your estate at that point because you signed it off, right? So as soon as you pass, there it is. All the details are taken care of. Now you go register it in your name. So that's just a simple way to deal with it. But just remember, wills are wishes that you want followed. Trusts must be followed, because essentially it's a new entity like a corporation that you've created where you're the trustees of that. I'm going to throw in just one more little tidbit before we move on here. I ran into this with my parents in their trust and wills. They had carved out a specific amount of cash that they wanted to go to each of their grandchildren. When my mom finally passed away and I'm the trustee, there was a big question about whether or not that, towards the end of her life, whether there was going to be enough cash in her estate to actually fulfill those gifts. And I think it was $15,000 to each of the grandchildren, right? My father worked in finance for 50 years, and he didn't think about this little detail. So very knowledgeable people miss this. If you put in a percentage, let's say you want to give each of the grandchildren 1% of your estate. So whether there's $1 left or $1 million, they get 1% of whatever's left. Nobody has to figure out, what are we going to do to fulfill this obligation, because it's not in the will, it's in the trust that we're supposed to give this hard dollar amount to each of these people or these organizations. And it's not there anymore because some unexpected events came up, right? So use percentages, please, when you go out Monday and set up your trusts. Did that get through to everybody? So that's really about all I have to say on this. I guess when I think about it in conclusion, just from my point of view, with a bit of planning and a little bit of love, your legacy gets to perpetuate, from one generation to the next. I still tell stories about my grandparents, and I even knew one of my great-grandparents, and get to tell those stories to my kids, and hopefully one day to their kids. But if you don't remember or took a note on anything that any of us had to say here today, please go home with this in the front of your brain. 50% of the value of your collection, one bike or 100, is locked up in the documentation and the paperwork. You lose that, you don't bother getting it. Look to your left, look to your right. One of you has a vehicle with back fees, no title. The registration was allowed to lapse, and so there's back fees on it. It wasn't put on non-operational status, something like that. So please, I care about your finances as much as your bikes, so please take care of them, get organized, and if you'd like to know more about MotoNexus Garage, it's a cheap, easy way to deal with all the stuff that we're talking about, because I created it for myself. So anyway, I'll pass to Jan.
Thanks, Clay. Based in Ohio, not originally from Ohio, as you could probably tell by this outrageous accent. I'm also the president of the International CBX Owners Association, and I consider myself very fortunate in the sense that during COVID, my son and I decided that he wanted to get out of construction and into motorcycle restoration. So I get to work with my son every day, which is a pretty nice way to pass knowledge along. And it was along those ways that he didn't want to deal with a bunch of miscellaneous stuff if anything was to happen with me. So we've sort of moved that on to now we are a motorcycle dealer. Just to come back to one of Clay's comments, in Ohio, a title has to be notarized. And a notary is not allowed to notarize a title if the buyer's information is not filled out. So that is an issue in Ohio. So I would say that a lot of this stuff is state-specific. Make sure that you know what has to be done in your state. I'm in Ohio. I went through this whole thing. I ended up putting all of my motorcycles into a trust. And the reason I did that was because there's twofold. If I buy a motorcycle for what I tell my wife I bought it for, and I put that on the title, and that motorcycle is worth considerably more than that, which typically it is, then there is a big tax consequence if anything was to happen to me. The title says $500. That bike's worth $100,000. Now you have to pay tax on $99,500, which is a bit of an issue. So does anybody want to guess how many lawyers there are in Ohio? Just a guess.
Too many.
About 40,000. Okay? Does anybody want to guess how many qualified elder law attorneys there are in Ohio? It's about 30. Right. Well, so in all of the conversations that I've had with a lawyer, usually a lawyer will tell you his rate within about 2 minutes of talking to him. In the case of an elder law attorney, that is typically not the case. I had all my trusts and everything set up for about $3,000. We needed 3 trusts to do the whole thing. And they were more concerned about, okay, how do you minimize the pain that you leave behind for your heirs, right? And how do you minimize the donations to the government? Because there are plenty of those already. So appraisal of your bike is a very important part of it. If you go outside of the doors here, you'll see an optimistic appraisal of their motorcycles, right? That's what they would like to get. It's not likely to be market value. If you have something that is reasonably known, the best way to get market value is a place like eBay, because they will pay you at that time what that is worth. Okay, Meekum, again, if that Yamaha Radiant had cocaine in the tank or not, or maybe both of those were drinking, I don't know, but nobody knows why that bike made $35,000. So there's always these statistical blips that, we don't know about, but hey, it happens.
Well, there's a bunch of guys out there hunting for Yamaha Radiums.
Oh, there'll be 45 of them at Meekum next year. Yeah. But anyway, so I went through and talked to these elder law attorneys, and there are 30 of them, and please, find the right ones for your area that can help you set these things up. They will go through a lot of the eventualities, like, okay, you entered all your motorcycles into a trust. There is a trustee, which is typically your kids, and then they say, well, how about your son-in-law? Do you like him? Well, at the moment I do. Well, what about if he divorced his wife, your daughter, and he marries someone else? Do you still want part of your belongings to go to that guy? And so it bears some thinking about, well, do I or do I not? So you can do these trusts in a bloodline type form where it goes to your grandkids, if it, so lots of specific questions to your situation, and if that lawyer is listening to your situation, he will advise you the best way. And it's not an expensive thing to do. When I first started talking to a regular lawyer, it was going to cost me about $6,000 or $7,000 to do this trust, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a bit of money. But they would have to probably talk to an elder law attorney to get it set up, so they sit in the middle and collect, a little bit of a finder's fee, I'm sure. You're better off going to the person that actually is going to set it up to make sure it gets done the right way. But when you're looking at valuations, in the CBX Club, we restore CBXs. usually down to originality, right? If a motorcycle has the original paint, the original parts, the correct parts, that's where the value is. And people tell me, well, CBX is too quiet. I want to have a more noise out of the exhaust. Drill some holes in the pipes, and I won't do it. But I mean, it also, as soon as you start customizing it, realize you're customizing it for yourself, right? Your taste is not the same as everybody else's. So you're customizing it. You're going to devalue the motorcycle for anybody else, unless you find the one guy that thinks, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly how I would have done it, which is rare. So originality is always what counts. And, the valuations, things have dipped a little bit, but the correct motorcycle, the original bikes, have still kept the value, because a lot of people realize that to restore, and that means going back to the way it left the factory, it takes many hours of work, right? I have the example at the Motorcycle Foundation booth, two old, 1974 Suzuki Trials bikes. One of them I'm trying to sell for $5,000, and people go, oh, that's a lot of money for an old Trials bike. And there's another one which is built the same month in the same year that I'll sell for $1,500. But it's got a bunch of dents in the gas tanks. It's got, it's been used and loved and crashed. And I say, well, that's $1,500. So the challenge is, can you get that $1,500 Trials bike to look like the $5,000 Trials bike and only spend $3,500 doing it? And if you can do that, I've got a job for you. Because there's about 150 to 200 hours in a restoration. So, and that doesn't often get appreciated. So make sure that you incorporate that in your values when you have something that's been lovingly restored and time spent on it. Okay. So that's basically all I had. I don't have notepads, and it was going to be short and sweet, I told Mark. So I think we can open it up for questions.
I want to add something to what Jan said. So elder law is actually a new term to me, but I don't know Ohio law. All right. In California, you go to a family law attorney. So somebody who, and this is in a lot of states, where somebody in family law is going to specialize in trusts and wills and child custody cases, all that kind of stuff. When I went to my primary attorney, he said, Clay, not to come here. I'm going to charge you an arm and a leg. Yeah, his trust was $25,000. The one I got made was $4,000. So they mark it up, all right? So depending on the zip code of your attorney, prices can be all over. But you want to go right to the source, as Jan was saying, because you'll get a much better deal. And you shouldn't need to spend more than a few $1,000s. Like I said, less than the price of a bike. So sell a bike and get the trust.
As far as valuations, how good is Haggerty's valuation?
Well, funnily enough, I'm actually on the Haggerty's valuation team for CBXs, and I've seen some pretty interesting pictures. And then to put a value on it gets tricky, right? Because you can't see from the picture if it's been repainted, etc. But they have a pretty good way of giving you a guide. This is where
they're online, their valuation tool. You can go online and get I don't know if it's coming back from auction prices that they're seeing to.
You'll get a range. Right. They will typically give you a range. I don't think they do appraisals as such. They will basically take your word for it. If you say, well, I've bought this motorcycle and I paid $50,000. The last CBX that I sold for close to $50,000 was the one that was owned by Evel Knievel, and that was because of the heritage that went with it. Yeah. But to get $50K for a CBX right now is pretty tough. So if you try to insure it for $50K, they're going to say, yeah, no, that's not going to fly, or they're going to make you pay the premium. Right? So they can come back two ways.
On Haggerty, you can drill down on any vehicle that you're looking at, and they'll show you a dot plot map. And so if you put your cursor over one of the dots, it shows you, okay, well, this vehicle sold for this and this.
So Haggerty will bring a trailer?
Haggerty.
Bring a trailer.
Yeah, too. And so when you do that on Haggerty, you got to look very carefully at every dot, because some of those bikes are not going to be relevant to what you're trying to put a value on. So I found, I go through, I'm looking for a 1972 Honda 754, right? there will be other 754s that find their way into that dot plot, right? So just look carefully, pull out the ones that matter to you, right? And you can figure out a reasonable valuation from that. It's mostly auction sales. So, because that's where they can get the API, application program, the connection to the data from the source, Mecum, Bring a Tray, whoever, right? Yeah.
Would insure your entire collection?
Yes. I actually did that. I went to Haggerty. I was with State Farm for years, and then I sold an investment policy. Actually, they call it it was a life insurance. I think it was a 20-pay plan or something, where you only paid for 20 years, and they would insure, your life insurance. And I decided it wasn't actually the right name for it. I said it should be called a bad investment policy. But anyway, I left State Farm and talked to Haggerty. And from having 2 vehicles insured and the rest sitting in my barn, which I'd like to call a museum, but it's not really, I insured everything with Haggerty for, I think it was $2.5 million worth of vehicles, and it cost me like $5,000 a year or something, and that's the whole thing covered. So it was a very inexpensive way to transfer, but yeah, they will do the whole collection. You need pictures of every vehicle, and of course a picture of the title that goes with that vehicle, and then they will let you enter it in there.
There's a certain amount of parts and pieces that are not necessarily motorcycles,
Right.
but they do have value.
I don't know if Haggerty will do parts. That I'm not sure. Do you
I
know?
don't think so. I think it has to be a complete vehicle. I have a vintage BMW with a sidecar, and I have 2 policies for that. The sidecar is insured separately from the bike. They consider the sidecar a vehicle. So, but parts or machinery, I don't know, but there are other companies that do that.
With
Yeah.
Haggerty, I don't have it right now with motorcycles, but on cars, there is an additional coverage on parts,
Oh, okay.
spares, and those kinds of things.
Okay.
But whether that means basket, they'll insure basket cases, that's basically what you're asking? Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's a good question. Now I want to know. See, you just found a gap in my data. So,
Just another question. You said you can do because I have Haggerty on myself, so is there a financial advantage to doing a collection versus an individual bikes?
I'm not sure that there is much of an advantage, but they will do agreed value. So they will go through the whole list of everything that you're insuring and have that value, and then that totals up. And if it comes up to a certain level, then you become private client, which means you get somebody that you can call directly and some other benefits. So, but Haggerty's been going through some changes, and I think other insurance companies are realizing they're missing out. So I would say that, companies like State Farm and Progressive and others will probably have something similar, which is great. Competition is a good thing, right?
mm-hmm.
State Farm is now part of Haggerty.
There you go.
You go to State Farm and they will write you a Haggerty.
That was nationwide for a while, so. But it's a very important aspect because there's a lot of stuff that's underinsured. As Clay said, if you want to insure a 750 Honda, yeah, you're going to get $800, and it doesn't matter how much money you poured into that bike. So, yeah.
I have State Farm, and I do have certain vehicles that I can put a price on.
Okay, and they've accepted that.
I don't know if they run that through Haggerty, but they've been doing that for a few years now.
Yeah, it's an agreed value policy. That's
Yes.
what you need to
Yeah.
have.
Yes, cars and bikes,
Mhm.
both.
That's what I said. They're starting to realize that they're missing out on a part of a market, so they will be.
Yeah, not everybody has done that. For a while, there was only a couple of companies out there you could turn to, and if you had more expensive things that are unusual, you'd turn to somebody like Lords of London, or so.
I know that in the UK, when you had a motorcycle club and you had a certain number of members, you could get a deal with an insurance company to get a little bit of a discount to entice people to join the club. But over here, I've not been able to get that secured for the CBX club anyway. That's too small of a number.
Just want to make a quick comment regarding like the auction appraisal. I have a pretty decent collection, and some. When I switched to Haggerty, I found that on my early Indians, diamond frame they had a value on a twin cylinder, 1908, that was less than the value of a single cylinder. And anybody who's very good or into that type of motorcycle knows that's crazy. It's a minimum of twice the rarity. So there are, in a lot of the things that I'm into, the super rare early stuff, where all the bikes that went on auction, most of the bike is fake. There's nothing real on that bike except the motor. And that's all their information, and they don't always know that. And I told them, I said, you can have your people call me, and I'll show you bikes. You show me the bikes on which auction, and I'll tell you about the bikes, and I'll show you my bikes, and I'll tell you why it's different. And so they were agreeable, and they put the price up to, a high number of something that where, there's only a dozen of them, left in the world.
Yeah, that would be a knowledge gap, though. I mean, you're talking about something that's really highly specialized, right? So having that information is going to be very important to an insurance company.
Well, I'm sure there's others here who have bikes that, that are rare, that they know that ones that they've seen in auctions, they're not real. And even if you have, if you have early knuckleheads or something, that are fairly high value, and a lot of them have a lot of reproduction parts on it, the majority of them that go to the auction. And if you ever tried to buy the parts for those bikes, every one of those little pieces, you could jump up $20,000, in a heartbeat.
But that's why every auction house says, you buy it when the hammer falls. It's your liability, is your responsibility. It's sold as is, where is, and they don't take any ownership of any of those parts or aspects of it. So beware.
Even when the VIN number has been ground and retapped.
Yes, one of 12 Z2s that came into the country, and this year there were 14 of them, amazingly enough. But anyway,
it was the story of the day. But the beauty of going to somebody like Haggerty or any insurance company that'll accept your value is, you're going to pay whatever you've said it's worth. So, the premium goes up as you make it a higher value. So, just be realistic and, get the best information you can, ask around, check the auctions, see what your similar bikes have sold for, and at least you know what kind of value the market is putting on the bike. And then you get a rough guess. At least you'll have some kind of a range that you can set your insurance policy at, but you're going to pay the premium according to, how much you tag onto it. So I try not to look at that bill.
Question.
Yeah.
If you have a general trust that has been used, can you modify that trust?
yes, usually they're revocable trusts, so
Yeah.
you can modify those.
Yeah, if it's an irrevocable,
Then it's tough.
Yeah, it's much harder. I had an irrevocable at one time, but then when we separated, that killed that trust. So writing the new trust identified its existence and that it's dead.
So the irrevocable is difficult.
It's much harder. There's a handful of reasons why you would want an irrevocable. For the purposes of this discussion, a revocable trust is usually the way you can go. That way you can make changes as time goes on and update it. Oh, I almost forgot. This is why you hire a family law attorney. I had a really good point made out to me. It said, Clay, are you going to buy more bikes? And my wife was like, like this, right? I said, yeah, probably. I will buy and sell and all that kind of stuff. Great. We're going to put a clause in that says anything you forgot to put in, I'm paraphrasing the legalese, anything you forgot to put into the trust is considered to be part of the trust. Yeah.
And that could be real estate. That could be real estate
Yeah,
companies.
exactly.
Anything that you have declared as part of the trust that would transfer instantly.
The way the law looks at that is, forgive me to any attorneys in the crowd, you buy a new motorcycle or a new vintage bike, and then a week later you pass, and you just didn't get it in there. They don't care about the clock in there, how long you forgot to do it, right? So it's your property. It's considered part of the trust, because you have that clause in there, right? Often the will that's attached to a trust is used as a place where you keep a bullet list of all the property, the artwork, the furniture, the jewelry, the bikes, the cars, all that. Real property, your house, land, farms, things like that. Get those into your trust.
Right.
That's the immediate thing you want to deal with. So.
Just from a tax perspective,
Yes.
that is really important.
Yes.
Because I bought a piece of property, I paid $50K for this thing. It's now valued at $400K. If I leave that to my kids, they get to pay taxes on $350,000 capital gains.
Yep.
If it's in a trust, the value is ascertained at the time of my death, so they don't pay any tax. The other thing in Ohio, I don't know if it's nationwide, the trust doesn't become effective for 5 years. So the trust starts the day you sign it. After year 1, 20% is safe. After year 2, it's 40%. So it takes 5 years to get the whole thing, the whole estate, into that trust and protect it. So that's, my wife told me I've got to stay alive for another 3 years.
Yeah, I don't know how many states do that. In California, it's immediate.
Okay.
So you
that's
sign that.
stated
You sign
again.
that document. You created an entity. That's it. As soon as you fund the trust, it's active.
Yeah.
So funding the trust just means transferring assets into it: your house, your cars, your bank accounts, whatever you want to do.
Yeah. Ohio's 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there may be other states that do a similar thing.
Again, find out for your state what's the legal requirement.
Yeah.
Maybe I misunderstood you earlier, but I thought you said that we should sign our titles.
Yeah, that's not in Ohio because you cannot notarize the title if the buyer is not filled in.
Right.
Understand?
Right.
States, or a whole lot of the states, aren't notarized title anymore. So there would be, to me, it'd be ridiculous to sign a title and have your titles all signed.
It's all open, and if somebody finds your titles, they just got your bikes.
It is open, but remember the disclaimer I put on it. Stick it in your safe deposit box at the bank, or, I have a hunch there's about a dozen gun safes in this audience, and so probably I've got one. I grew up in Montana, so all of that kind of documentation goes into my fireproof safe. So, yeah.
Question on the and or all those elements. In Indiana, it appears that they don't recognize or.
Okay.
They only do.
Again, it's state specific, right?
Yeah.
That's,
They only do and. So I guess my question is, if no matter who that other and person is, if I'm deceased and there's a long history of that person having been ownership, do they pay probate on it at that point, even though they are owners and have been for decades?
Well, you wouldn't have probate on a single vehicle like that, right? It's your whole estate. So,
right. But would that be included?
Yeah, that would be included.
That'd be fine.
If your estate goes to probate, then that would have to be sorted out. So, the DMV would get a death certificate delivered along with the title and confirm that she's the new owner and all that. There are
Right.
easier ways to get around that, so they don't have to deal with that nonsense.
I think
Okay.
the golden rule and a way to evaluate the lawyer that you're talking to is they should be saying, avoid probate at all cost.
Yep.
That is the number one goal, is avoid probate. And if you want to find out what Joe Blow next door had in his possession and he passes and he doesn't have a trust, go to the probate hearings, and you will find out exactly what he had and what his doings were. So, yeah, unless you want all that out in the open, avoid probate at all costs.
It's a very messy, lengthy, 18 to 24 months is the average period in California for probate. And we have, and it's considered to be one of the most efficient probate courts in the country.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it would astound me to think of, I can't imagine my wife and my kids are all over the country, right, having to deal with something at a distance for that period of time because I screwed up on a financial decision? No. Get a trust. It's cheap. It's easy.
Yep.
Used to be trusts were only for really wealthy people. I learned this lesson back in early 90s. And I thought it was just for, like exceptionally wealthy people that we knew whose companies had just gone public and all this kind of stuff, right? And so, yeah, back in the late 80s and early 90s, a trust was very expensive. The attorneys were like, well, do you have an estate that's worth $2 million or more, or things like that, right? And today, none of that's really very important, right? Because you can get one done up. Like I said, I did one for $750 in the Bay Area, okay, where everything.
South Dakota, right?
Yeah. No, I didn't redomicile it. It was, all right, so funny story. I get the trust written. I haven't funded the trust yet. I didn't put anything into it. Just got it all done. And then I meet my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I decided, what would be a really great idea is let's go someplace you've never been. She says, well, I've never been to Paris. I said, okay, great. I'll take you to Paris. 3 days in Paris. She said, you know what? I'm going to take off another 10 days from work. Would you figure out a way that we can go motorcycling in France? Right? Of course. Yes, of course I'll do that. And so we spent 10 days riding all through the French Alps and everything. It was fantastic. The 10 days on the bike was cheaper than the 3 days in Paris.
Oh, sure.
Okay. TheFrenchRide.com. Look them up. It was fantastic. It's really affordable. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But getting back from that trip, everybody said, well, did he pop the question? You were in Paris. No, I waited for a DGR ride when all my friends were around. And she wasn't expecting it. So, yeah.
I don't know if this applies, but I've been told that in Michigan, if you try to transfer privately owned vehicles from your name into your trust name, you've got to pay sales tax every time on each vehicle when it changes title from private to the trust. Does that sound familiar? Is that universal?
Again, it's a state-specific thing, right? So I know that in Ohio, I can transfer a title of one of my vehicles into the trust, and it's $15 title issue fee, no taxes. So again, it's state-specific.
Yeah, I don't know that. I'm trying to figure out why that would be, but Michigan does have some interesting laws. You're selling it to yourself.
You're basically giving it to the trust.
Yeah, so maybe the way around that is you gift it to the trust. Because like in a California title, there's a section to write, it's a gift, zero value, right? Or $500 in value, but it's a gift, right? So there's no transfer tax at that point. So maybe that's how you do it. I'm sure a good trust attorney can tell you how to get around that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
To obtain a title, I used to be able to, in Licking County at least, go to the court and get a title for $150. That has now turned into a 9-step process, which includes a salvage inspection and all sorts of other hurdles. There are places advertised in magazines that say, hey, I can get you a title, or you get a registration out of Maine or whatever. As a dealer, if I walk into the BMV with one of those, they'll laugh me out of the place. I'm told, don't come in with a Tennessee title or a Maine registration or anything like that. So they all know that that's something that goes on, but it is a way to get a title in your name. If you just have one vehicle that doesn't have a title, you can do it. I can't do it anymore, but it's a way to at least legalize it. And, most of these bikes are vintage. We're trying to give them a new lease of life, get them restored and get them back on the road. There's no real bad ideas that oh, it's a stolen bike, you're trying to get a title for it. That's not the case. It's just it was lost, or it was never transferred. So there are ways to get titles. I would say get it done sooner rather than later because those loopholes are getting closed down. So get the paperwork.
And I'm going through the same thing in Indiana. I've probably done a dozen over the years with the original.
Yeah, you'll be on a list somewhere.
You know, and it's not easy to pull all those things together.
Right.
But recently I send that all in, and all of a sudden I get a letter back saying, sorry, Charlie, you got to go through the court process.
Yep.
You know, and that's 4 months sometimes to complete that.
Yeah, in Ohio it takes 3 months to get a salvage inspection scheduled. It's a pain in the neck.
In California, AAA will do DMV services. They can't do an out-of-state transfer because that requires a VIN verification or, like I say, a salvage verification. But there's one AAA office near my house, and I used to go in there, and it was like, can I see your card, And then it was, oh, hello, Mr. Baker. Do you have your card with you today? Oh, I can look it up. Now it's, hi, Clay. What are we doing today? So...
So you're abusing it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm using my service. Yeah, I get full value out of my membership.
In Arizona, you can do a bond and title very easily.
Yeah.
Bond costs 1% of the value.
Oh, that's not bad.
They have to see the bike in person to get the VIN number off it. Mm-hmm. And if it's not on the computer, for a $50 bond, then you can get a title real easily.
Cool.
Wow. Do you have to live there, or can you just go there?
You need a mailing address there.
I've got a trailer.
I have a mailing address if anybody needs it.
Actually, not just a trailer. The latest thing I did, my wife lost her mind over this, and now she sees the benefit. I put a hydraulic lift in the back of my pickup truck so we can take just one bike and leave the trailer at home. And she's like, we can stay in any hotel we want? Not just one with trailer parking? All right. I'm going to make one request. Wanda, you went through this process.
Yes.
Can you...
In the microphone.
Yes. Yeah. Can you tell a little bit about what that was like with, 50 motorcycles?
And some cars.
And some cars.
No, we had a museum. We had a museum in our back of our property. A lot of motorcycles, cars. And what we did, we made a list of everything, and every year we would put a value on them and changed it. And a lot of people didn't bother me when he passed away. We call them widow chasers. And they didn't bother me because they knew I was involved in this, and I knew what motorcycles were. But that helped so much to have that value on those. The only thing we didn't do is put a value on our parts. But I had a close friend that I trusted, a vendor, he's here, and he came and paid me. I trusted him, so that was the only thing. I don't know if we had room to do the parts, but it came out good. Nobody bothered me for a year after he passed away, and most people knew by word of mouth. And I sold about 45 motorcycles. I got 3 left, but they're newer and people don't care for them. So that's how it happened. But he also did a list of what he paid and what he had into a motorcycle, each one, so I could use that to make a deal on the price at the value. It worked out good. Had a lot of memorabilia in the museum, and that's what I've been vending for years, but they're really small now. I got rid of most of them. So it's very important, get those values. I knew where the titles were. I knew everything. The only thing, all the titles was in his name.
I love this woman.
And I had the titles changed to my name before I could sell them. It was easy. I just went to Department of Motor Vehicles. It wasn't hard at all.
A question from Christine.
And Wanda is a tremendous reference. We asked her to be on the panel, including the motorcycles. Dick had a Focke-Wulf 190 Messerschmitt engine, and that she had to move on. Yeah.
It was valued. But he bought it in Germany, had it shipped over here, and when they found out he passed away, a guy wanted it back for a museum, and it was easy. I had it crated. They come picked it up. Any questions?
What we're going to do is these will be available for questions up front. You can stand up, and we'll call it quits today. Thank you very much for coming. We really appreciated your attendance. And so stay around and ask questions. The three in front will be available, and I've been through this many, many times myself. I did big car shows. I still do motorcycle shows around the country, and I can't tell you how many times I get a call, usually from a mother or grandmother or daughter or something. Their father died, their uncle died, whatever. They have 5 motorcycles they said were really valuable. That's all they know is he said they were really valuable, and no one knows anything about them, and they don't know where the titles are, and this sort of thing. And so the sooner you can take care of the stuff, the less pain there's going to be. And when you have someone that passes, you don't want to have to go through the trauma then of now having garages full of stuff that no one knows what it is, what the value is, and then people trying to take advantage of them. So thank you very much for coming.